Hey, I'm Guy Unger. I'm back. This is the second explained video. We're going to be dealing with intervals on this one. If you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. So in this video with intervals, we're going to discuss what are intervals, how to classify intervals, how to find intervals on your instrument, and what they sound like most importantly, and also how to invert them. So without further ado, let's get to it. Okay, intervals are the measurement between two notes. So if we have one note that's low and then another one is high, there's a distance between that, and we have names for those. The big thing to talk about here, though, is we need to understand what the major scale is, because everything is compared to that. And if you haven't watched my previous video explaining how to build major scales, go back and watch that. Make sure you understand that one first, and that will help you understand these a lot better. So we're going to use like the key of D major. So I'm going to spell out a D major scale, which would be D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, and D. So if we're comparing something from the lowest note, which is the tonic, which is D, and if we go from D to E, that is considered a second. So E is the second note in the scale. So every note in the scale is numbered. So D is 1, E is 2, F sharp is 3, G is 4, A is 5, B is 6, and C sharp is 7. And then again, like I said, the octave is 8. But we also have different classifications. We have a major set of intervals, and we have a perfect set of intervals, and we handle them differently. Your unison, if I play an exact note D and then play that same exact D, that is called a unison. So our perfect intervals are the unisons, fours, fives, and the octaves. So in the case of D major, if we're looking at notes from D up, a perfect unison would be D to that exact D. Our perfect fourth would be D to G. Our perfect fifth would be D to A. And our perfect octave would be D to the octave higher of D. That's our perfect intervals. And you'll notice that they're on the very outside of the scale, and they're also in the very center of the scale. So sandwiched in between the root note and the fourth would be the second and the third. And those are major intervals. So our 2s, 3s, 6s, and 7s, those are major intervals. And again, like I said, they're sandwiched in between 1 and 4. So the 2 and 3s right there, and then the 6 and 7 are sandwiched in between the fifth and the octave. Perfect intervals are 1s, 4s, 5s, and octaves, and major intervals are 2s, 3s, 6s, and 7s. All right, so that gives us our first set of things. So if we reanalyze this and we completely answer what these things are, D to F sharp is a third, but specifically it's a major third. So D to F sharp is a major third. D to G is a fourth, but specifically it is a perfect fourth. So that's how we understand those classifications. You can think of your scales on your instrument and then think what the shapes are. And we'll get into that for a second. So if you play guitar, if I play D major scale, and that's D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, and D. Also, let me just fill you in on this. There's two ways to play intervals. You can play them what's called harmonically, which means together, or separately, which is melodically. Speaking of which, that's my D, E, F sharp. So D to F sharp is a major third. All right, D to G, D, E, F sharp, G, D to G is a perfect fourth. Now, how do we change these? So, you know, to make them different intervals. Everybody's heard of minor intervals and stuff like that. So, separately. So if we think of our major set of intervals, which is our 2s, our 3s, our 6s, and our 7s, if we lower the third, for instance, let's say we take, or well, let's just take the second. So D to E is a second. So if I lower this E down 1 fret, D to E flat. All right? So I'm calling it E because that's the second letter from D in my scale, so I have to maintain that name because I'm calling it a second. So if I lower it, it becomes E flat. So D to E flat is a minor second. So if you lower a major interval, it becomes minor. So let's look at a third. So D, E, F sharp. So D to F sharp. If I lower this F sharp to F natural, I have a minor third. Okay? Same thing with my sixes. If I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is D to B. If I lower that, it becomes a minor 6. All right, so let's do the seventh. D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp. D to C sharp is our major seventh. If I lower that, it becomes a minor seventh. Okay? So if we lower a perfect interval, it becomes diminished. And mostly, really, the only one that you're ever going to deal with that does that will be the fifth. But any of the intervals, hypothetically, you could lower a perfect interval and make it diminished. But the only one you're really going to deal with would be the diminished fifth. That would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if I lower that, it becomes a diminished fifth, which is also known as a tritone. It's a very ugly interval, lots of dissonance. But it can work to your advantage as we get further in theory, you'll realize. Now, there's one more step to lowering intervals. If we lower a major interval once, it becomes minor. But if we lower that minor interval, it becomes diminished as well. So if you lower a major interval twice, so major third goes to minor third. If I lower it again, it becomes a diminished third, which is really E. So, but we're going to call it, we would call this E flat or F flat, even though F really doesn't have a black key on the piano. So it gets a little confusing, but that exists. And let me tell you, the only place that you're really going to use this one is really on the seventh. D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp. We lower that once, it becomes a minor seventh. We lower it again, it becomes a diminished seventh. All right? All right, so that has its purpose. When we get to seventh chords and we talk about that, this will make a little more sense. If we raise a major interval, it becomes augmented. So the only place you're really going to deal with that would be probably the second. In this case, if we raise the second, it becomes an augmented second. You could hypothetically do it with any of the major intervals, but mostly it's going to be dealt with the second. And seconds will be called nines and extended chords. We'll get into that on down the road, but like your Jimi Hendrix chord. That's an augmented second or an augmented nine, sharp nine, if you will. If we raise a perfect interval, it becomes augmented. And again, hypothetically, you can raise any perfect interval, and it will become augmented. But specifically, the fourth is going to be the one. We raise the fourth up, it becomes an augmented fourth. All right. Now this is also your Lydian sound. Once we get into modes. Now this augmented fourth is a tritone, but didn't we say that the fifth, the diminished fifth, was a tritone? Well, yes, we did. Sometimes it'll be called augmented fourth. Sometimes it'll be called a diminished fifth. Now, knowing the shapes on the guitar are pretty important. It's very, very helpful. So, like for instance, if we do this third thing, 1, 2, 3, we have this major third. Wherever I move that shape around, it's a third. All right, it's the cool thing. Any set of strings, the only one that's different on the guitar is on the second or the third and second strings. Everything gets moved up one fret on the second string when we go from the shape here. So that would be a major third here, and it goes back to a major third shape there. And then finding your fourths. Your fourths look like this across there, and then once we get to the set of string, it moves up, and then we're back to that. Our fifths, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Wherever that's at, that's our good old-fashioned power chord. We get to this set of string, the third and second set, it moves up a fret. We move to the first string and second string, and it's right back to what it was. Now, once we get to the sixth, seventh, and octaves, things shift up a little sooner. So if we get to our sixth, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, same thing. That set. Then here goes to that set, and then it stays like that because we have a note below the second string and one above the second string. So it keeps the shape. And then our seventh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Same, and then here it moves up, and then same thing on this set. All right, then we have our octaves. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Our perfect octaves here. Then we get here, it moves up a fret. And we get here, and the higher note moves up a fret again. So that gives us all our basic major and perfect shapes. All right, and you can do the same thing with the minors and the diminished and the augmented intervals as well. I'll leave that up to you to do all of those things. But probably the more important issue here is to understand what these things sound like, because you want to log these things away and train your ear with that. So intervals are really important because they're the building blocks of your chords and scales and everything else. So a second, to me, when I play a second, I just hear what a scale goes up. All right? The third, I have this little jingle. When the saints go marching in, that's what I hear. The fourths, I hear, here comes the bride. The fifths, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I hear Star Wars. So that's how I hear my perfect fifths. The sixes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, the sixes are, for me, the old NBC theme. NBC. Major sevenths, the old Take On Me. The old Aha song. Octaves. Somewhere Over the Rainbow. So whatever works, you find these little things that help you memorize the sound of these things. And there's a lot of great websites out there and things that work with ear training too. And I'll put a few of those down in the link. And last but not least, we're going to get into inverting intervals. All right, so inverting intervals, what happens is we flip them. So if we have a major third, we keep starting with that. But if I take this D to F sharp and I take this low D note and I move it up an octave against the F sharp, now the F sharp is the low note and the D is the high note. This goes from a major third to from F sharp to D, F sharp being the lowest note, makes this a minor 6. Now why is that? So there's a basic set of rules that'll help you kind of find these quickly, but really it's just that whatever the low note is becomes your new tonic, so your new scale that you start with, and then you just kind of base everything off of that. But you can work all of that out if you want to, or you can just memorize some basic little steps. So finding shortcuts is always a nice little thing. So here's your shortcuts. All right, your ones or unisons will invert to octaves. Your octaves will then invert back to unisons. Your twos will invert to sevenths, and sevenths will invert to twos. Your threes will invert to sixes, and sixes will invert back to threes. All right, fours will invert to fives, and fives will invert back to fours. So, all right, now the next step to this, there's one more step, is understanding that major intervals invert to minor intervals, and then back the other way. Minors invert to majors. So minors and majors invert with one another. Perfects invert to perfects. So they stay perfect. So a perfect fourth inverts to a perfect fifth, and a perfect fifth inverts to a perfect fourth. Now, I'll show you what I mean with that. So if I do this perfect fourth here on D, which is D to G, and I keep the G and move the D up to a higher octave, it becomes a perfect fifth. So perfects invert to one another. Augmenteds invert to diminished. Diminished inverts to augmented. And then augmenteds, back and forth with that. So that's how that works. And that's pretty much everything you need to know about intervals, except short of counting all the semitones and the half steps to see how many each one of those intervals are. And you can find that somewhere on the internet and dial that up. But to me, it's not as practical as just knowing your instrument and finding them, and relating them to scales. To me, that's just the easier way to do it in the more practical way. So hopefully this has helped you. If you have any questions, please, by all means, put something down in the comment section. Let me know. Our next video will be on triads, building triads, and I look forward to hearing from you. Please share this with your friends and Come back and see me next time. Thank you.